In launching and institutionalizing, you are trying to effect organizational change, and you are trying to move from a current state of practice to a desired future state of practice. So you need to assess your current state of practice, you need to assess where you want to be and by when, and you need to figure out how do we bridge that gap. And this is something you would do whether or not you are taking on software product lines. This is something you should do if you're taking on SOA, or if you're moving into cloud computing, or whatever it is. You know, where are we now with respect to our approach to technology and our approach to management? What's the desired future state, and how do we get there? So for launching and institutionalizing a product line, your end goal is an operational product line. It's not a core asset base, and it's not just about creating a set of products. It's having this organizational capability to turn out products on a predictable delivery cycle. So it does involve a strategic combination of technical practice areas and management practice areas. When you get beyond the launching phase, you need to look ahead to see, or while you are doing the launching phase, you need to look beyond that to the institutionalization phase. What happens when we get beyond our first product and when we scale up from the small organization that started the product line to the larger organization that's going to become the entire product line organization, whether that's an entire business unit or an entire organization consisting of multiple business units. So you need to think about where the money is going to come from when you get beyond the pilot project, for example. You need to think about if the product line champion is going to retire once the product line is established, which is what happened in the case of Cummins. You need to have a succession plan in place, and fortunately Cummins did have a succession plan in place. So there's the launching phase, and then there's the institutionalization phase, where the end goal is to make product lines community practice so that the role of champion disappears, because the organization is routinely operating as a product line organization. So there is a pattern dealing with launching and institutionalizing called the adoption factory pattern, and that will be covered in the module that deals with patterns. There's also the ideal model from the SEI that I'll show you in a moment that can be used in conjunction with the adoption factory pattern to roll out this whole product line approach in a way that's most appropriate for your organizational context. This is a representation of the ideal model. The name comes from the first letter of each of the major phases in this model. This is not a product line specific model, but it's something that can easily be adapted to the needs of a product line. It begins by looking at, over on the left, what's the stimulus for change? So in a product line context, what's driving you towards software product lines? For Celsius Tech, for example, the stimulus for change was, if we don't learn how to cope with multiple simultaneous development efforts, we're going to go out of business. We simply can't continue to do things the old way, taking the results from a previous customer development effort and trying to tailor them for use on a current development effort. That simply won't scale. So we need to change the way we do business, or we go out of business. That's a pretty big stimulus for change. I would hope that in your case, the stimulus is less a matter of we're going to become extinct than it is we see an opportunity to increase our business or get more money or reduce our costs, that there's some rational business planning associated with this, and that you can make a quantitative case. But that would be the stimulus for change, for moving towards a product line effort. And when you move beyond the initiating phase into the diagnosing phase, you characterize your current state of practice in however method you have right now for doing at least some preliminary diagnosis of any strengths and any deficiencies with respect to the kind of technology change you want to adopt. So in the case of a product line, the SEI has the product line technical probe as a way of doing that sort of diagnosis. Once you move into the establishing phase, then you have plans in place, you have people identified who are capable of creating core assets, creating products, and so on. And when you get the go-ahead to proceed, we recommend that you do it in the form of a pilot project, for example, or some sort of proof of concept in the acting phase that will give you an idea of whether or not this approach could actually work within your organization. And then following through from the acting phase to the learning phase, collect some basic measures about the effectiveness of what you did in the pilot project and see whether or not there are any issues to be resolved before you scale up and go around the cycle again. So we recommend a few cycles through this, creating increasing levels of capability from the core asset base as you ramp up towards becoming a full-up operating product line organization. So if you do decide to pick a pilot project as a proof of concept for product lines, make sure that this is a real project with some consequences and some visibility. So it shouldn't be so big and so important that if you fail, you'll bankrupt the organization, or if you fail, that product lines will get a bad name forever in the organization. So it should solve a real problem so that if you're successful, management will notice and they will be prepared to fund it beyond the pilot project stage. It should have a reasonable chance of success, and if you can't staff the project with out-and-out advocates of a product line approach, you should at least have people who are open-minded enough to give product lines a try. And you can get by with a relatively lightweight approach to the processes initially, but ultimately if the product or the project is successful and you start to scale up to the larger organization, you need to be prepared to become a bit more disciplined. So you can get by with a loose approach to processes if you're in a small team and everybody is in the same building. But when you start to bring in people from other sites, there needs to be a more formal approach to the interactions between the different parts of the organization and the handoff of artifacts and the tracking and the configuration management and so on. The other approach is to take some diagnostic assessment and use that as the basis for planning for future actions. So an example, in addition to the SEI product line technical probe, is the SEI product line quick look, which is basically a repackaging of the one-day preliminary phase of the product line technical probe. So this is where we would come into the organization, talk to the key people involved, and do a quick assessment of whether or not product lines are feasible for the organization right now. One of our customers and collaborators, Bosch, has actually created their own version of this that they call the Product Line Potential Analysis Workshop. This is a half-day meeting with people from different business units to find out whether or not there is any hope of creating a product line within that business unit. So they ask a series of structured questions about the potential for a product line approach within the business unit, and then based on that, they can follow up with a more detailed analysis of what would need to be done to turn the organization into a product line organization. Yes, Mike?
A technical probe is the in-depth looking at things that are candidates for product lines and approaches to it?
Yes.
Okay, and then the quick look is just the upfront as a standalone entity?
It can be done as a standalone entity, yes.
Is there a post-technical probe version of the quick look, saying, okay, this is at this point in time, just sort of like a follow, almost like a Scampy C, just as a little follow-up as to sanity check. Are you going the right direction? Or?
There's not one packaged as a short follow-up, but what we have had for two of our customers is a reprobe. One of our customers wanted us to do a probe after about 4 years, and another customer wanted a reprobe after 2 years.
So probing our already existing product line.
Yeah. So the product line probe is not just for an organization that is planning to create a product line. It's also applicable to an organization that already has a product line in place. The quick look, one of the results of a quick look could be by mutual agreement, this organization is really not ready to take on software product lines just yet because we recognize we have too many problems to solve by way of process discipline or architecture competence, for example. And so there's no point in pursuing a full-blown product line technical probe. And we have had at least one customer where that has happened, where the preliminary phase result was, this organization has aspirations to become a product line organization, but on the basis of the preliminary phase, they've realized, and the SEI has agreed, there's no point in pursuing the main technical probe phase where we do a whole series of interviews. And that's the spirit of the Bosch quick look.
Are they limited to software product lines or system product lines as well?
In our case, it's primarily software because that's where people are having the most problems. But I'm sure this could easily be adapted to the needs
so far,
of a
most
system.
of what you presented, you could pretty easily. Software.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. The last one in the list is something that's similar in spirit to a product line probe without being a full-blown product line probe. This is some work that was funded by the European Union to look at the connections between what you do to create an architecture and what you do in the rest of the organization by way of coming up with the business case for becoming an architecture-centric organization and the organizational and process impacts of this architecture-centric approach. So it's very much in the spirit of a product line, but dealing with the subset of issues, the subset of business and technical issues surrounding the creation of an architecture and becoming an architecture-centric organization. So these are some of the ways that you can come to grips with the product line adoption process. And as you do this, you need to have some goals and objectives in mind for why you want to become a software product line organization in the first place. For example, why do you want to move to software product lines and not SOA? Or what do software product lines offer that cloud computing doesn't? And of course, the assumption is that you have a rational way of assessing any proposed technology change for the organization, a technology change that involves a combination of technology and business. So actually, on that note, can any of you talk about how your organization makes a determination of whether or not to move into a particular area, like SOA or whatever you're currently in? Do you know of an existing process, sort of the corporate standard for how we determine organizational change, or are you the last person to know about it when the reorg is announced? Don.
I was going to say, because we're more in the services line, we're driven by other factors that relate to opportunities and revenue and so forth, but it still gets back to being able to realize revenue opportunities at a lower cost. So being able to get leverageability out of things is sort of the key.
That's the basis for analyzing the options. Yeah. Okay, so there are practices in place within your organizations that could be adapted for coming up with a justification for a move to software product lines. And also, if you are planning to or already have a process improvement effort in place in the organization, use that as a springboard for product lines. Don't think of it in terms of, this part of the organization is thinking of becoming a product line organization. Those people over there are doing process improvement, and we as the architects and developers would never dream of talking to the process people. That's the wrong approach. If there's a resource in the organization that's already looking at process improvement, they should be brought into the product line effort. So if you don't do this properly, not only will you fail to meet the business goals of the organization, but you may kill product lines forever within the organization. But the big risk, in my mind, is not having a champion, not having somebody at the right level of the organization who can follow through on all of this and make sure. It's typically a single person, but that person relies on having competent people working for him or her, like the product line architect and the developers of major core assets, production manager, the core asset manager, and so on. So that person is supported by a competent organization. But the product line champion is the level at which the buck stops here. And that's the person ultimately responsible for the success or failure of the product line. And if you don't have that kind of person, or you don't see any potential in your organization for having that kind of role in the organization, then you need to think long and hard about whether or not product lines are an appropriate solution for your software engineering problems. Approach mismatch refers to the fact that if you are, for example, creating unique, customized products for specific customers with very little commonality and trying to force-fit a product line approach on top of that, you have to ask yourself, well, why are we doing this? Just because somebody thinks product lines are a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that you can fit that approach into that kind of environment. Our old friend management commitment, so in addition to that, you have things like insufficient staff commitment, where management is in favor of the approach, but the rank and file, well, they've been through organizational changes before, and now we're going to become a product line organization. Yeah, keep your head down, and this too shall pass. So, you're not going to get a product line that way. That's the other thing I should emphasize, is that if you are the product line champion, you need to repeat the product line message early and often. Don't assume that because you've given one PowerPoint presentation about product lines that everybody in the organization now understands the benefit of product lines and is on board with the idea. So you as the champion will need to do a lot of hand-holding and a lot of convincing and a lot of overcoming of resistance and cultural change. If you take on the wrong scope, you're trying to solve everything at once, or conversely, you're taking on a scope that will never give you any benefit. If you don't apply this in an appropriate way, in the sense that you are trying to apply a product line approach in an organization that is not receptive to the idea of product lines, and you are trying to force-fit a particular organizational structure that really doesn't match the organizational structure. You're trying to force-fit a matrix organization on a hierarchical organization, or vice versa, for example. If you miss opportunities to standardize on a product line, or if not a product line, at least a way of coming up with an architecture and a set of common components as part of moving to becoming an architecture-centric organization. If you have a lot of corporate standard processes, but you don't adapt them for the needs of a software product line, failing to evolve the approach, the lightweight, loose approach that enabled you to get started on the pilot project isn't necessarily the one that's going to allow you to continue. If you don't effectively disseminate the information throughout the organization, and this is something that we frequently encounter in our product line technical probes, where we interview the management team and they tell us, sure, everybody's on board with the product line. And then you talk to people lower down in the hierarchy, like developers and testers, and they tell you, the first time I heard we were moving to product lines was when I was told I had to show up for this interview as part of a product line probe. That is not effective dissemination of information. Finally, if there really isn't an emerging community that's receptive to the idea of tackling product building as a set of products versus a single product, if people don't really see the benefit of that and they don't see the benefit of becoming an architecture-centric organization, it's going to be very hard to get that message across and get people in the organization behind the idea of a software product line. Plenty of reading references in this area. And again, I don't expect you to answer these questions here and now, but something you as if not the champion, at least the evangelist, needs to think about is where in the organization would you find resistance to the idea of a product line approach? Where would you be likely to encounter support for the product line approach? And how would you counter that resistance, or how would you enlist that support as part of your product line effort? And typically, if the product line is being started within a technical group that has an architect and a few component developers who recognize the benefits of architecture, they aren't necessarily the people who can overcome the cultural resistance. And of course, the ultimate way of overcoming resistance is by controlling the money. But that's a rather harsh way of doing it. If you have a product line champion who has the change agent skills and the leadership skills that can gain the trust of the organization, you're in much better shape than if you're trying to do this as a grassroots effort from within a technical development organization. Yes, Don.
Although the point you make about the money is, it still gets back to how people are incented to sort of cooperate.
What's your incentive to cooperate? Yes,
right.
Exactly.
And it may not necessarily be money, but it often is.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of what are their drivers before you will get buy-in.
Yes, and in fact, as the product line champion or product line manager, you should be able to answer the question, what's in it for me, for all of the people who are going to be affected by this? And if you don't have an effective answer to that, then it's going to be hard to assemble an effective product line team. Raul.
Experiences of people implementing product lines, has the product line manager been the one spearheading the process improvement part of the product line transformation?
No, not always. For organizations that already have a process improvement effort in place, they will bring in that person as part of the product line effort and make sure that any improvements needed by way of process improvement are incorporated into the product line effort. But it's not the case that the product line manager or product line champion is the person behind the process improvement. In most of the organizations that I've seen by way of product line probes, it's a different person.